earlier today. Slums and squatters have all but disappeared. We have seen a new face of Malaysia that has emerged. Malaysia is now classified by the World Bank as an upper middle income country. Life expectancy has increased from 53 years in 1950 to 76 years today. Female labor force participation has risen from 40% in 1980 to 56% at the end of 2019. Malaysian cities have been modernized, and we have seen modern transport infrastructure, quality utility providers, productive manufacturing, and a highly evolved financial and services sector. The impressive past few decades of urbanization in Malaysia has radically changed the nation from a predominantly agrarian backwater that was commodity-based to one of the most advanced and diversified economies in the region. This transformation is not only spectacular, but it has become a case study reference for many nations. However, the contradictions and pitfalls of our past development patterns threaten our ability to meet the SDG goals by 2030. There are three fundamental issues we need to address. One, in the context of urban development, the endless urban sprawl that is encroaching on our natural systems and undermining our ability to leverage the full benefits of urbanization and agglomeration. Two, increased social inequality and vulnerabilities. The physical state of some of our low-cost housing estates and the socio-economic vulnerabilities of these communities point to the possibility that they will become slums of the future without systemic change. Three, environmental degradation in Malaysia, especially river and air pollution, waste disposal methods, and deforestation, needs a radical new approach if we are to meet the SDGs. Malaysia is also highly vulnerable to climate change. Increasingly, temperatures are on the rise and will lead to health and economic productivity consequences. Increases in flooding will cause loss of life and property and impact on our GDP. And rising sea levels will see some coastal areas becoming uninhabitable. All that said, Malaysia is a remarkable country. We have made enormous amount of tacit, we have an enormous amount of tacit know-how that has brought the nation this far and have proven ourselves resilient many times over. We are agile, we are innovative, and we have shown in the past that we can accelerate the development goals. My challenge to the fellow panelists and others in this dialogue is that we all know what needs to be done. We know we need to invest in public transport. We know we need to improve the lives of urban poor. We know we need to clean up our rivers and make our cities greener. We need to face and deal with the urban externalities that has arisen as a result of the development pattern that we have taken. And traveling around the country, you see, however, as we go around the country, we also see that new shoots are emerging. And how can we harness and how can we unlock the benefits of sustainable urbanism in the future? The fundamental question is now, how do we harness the emerging momentum and work together to make a transformative journey ahead by 2030 to see a sustainable urban Malaysia? With that, I would like to invite His Excellency Krzysztof, the Ambassador of Poland, to give a special presentation as the host nation of the World Urban Forum 11. Before he comes to the stage, I would like the Secretariat to play a short video about Katowice, the city that will be hosting World Urban Forum 11. Can I ask the Secretariat to play the video?
30 years ago, this was the reality in Katowice. Heavy industry and mining defined the whole region, and its capital was said to be the least friendly for living. When we regained freedom in 1989, a lack of technology, know-how, or capital was not a barrier to overcome, and anything was possible. We believed in our city and we wanted to change it. After 30 years, we can proudly say that the mission has been successful. But it's not over yet. Today, because of cooperation and involvement of the inhabitants, Katowice is a dynamically developing industrial, academic and cultural hub. The enormous changes are symbolized by the Culture Zone, a venue of the 11th edition of the World Urban Forum, which was built within a former coal mine. Today it hosts international meetings and conferences and art and culture, exhibited 14 meters below the surface. In Katowice, we understand the importance of our city developing sustainably. The city is known for being part of the nature-based solutions. It is one of the greenest cities in Poland. Forests and greenbelts constitute more than 50% of its area. Numerous parks and garden squares are revitalized like a former mining housing estate, Nikiszowiec, and they make the city more inhabitants-friendly. Many large investments and ecological developments have improved the air quality and increased energy security. But more importantly, ecological ideas were adopted by the inhabitants, who use their ecological municipal transport more frequently. The transformation process did not eliminate the industry completely, but has changed its face. Katowice and its whole region are still a strong industry hub, but today it's focused on high technology, like the cluster of Silesia Automotive and Advanced Manufacturing under the Katowice Special Economic Zone, which is a pioneer of innovative motorization. More than 30 years ago, the very first Polish heart transplants took place in our clinic, led by Zbigniew Religa. The clinic retains a world level, where 2 years ago a team led by Professor Zembala conducted a successful artificial heart operation. Katowice's heart-shaped logo combines two faces of the city, the traditional with the industrial heritage and the modern, creative and economically strong. As the largest center of the region, Katowice became the leader in metropolitan cooperation. This resulted in the establishment of the first and only Metropolitan Union in Poland. We are organizing the 11th edition of the World Urban Forum in order to share our experience. We believe that it may be helpful for other cities and regions which struggle with their industrial past. Our expertise can benefit them in search for solutions that ensure both sustainable development and care for inhabitants, tradition and culture.
Let's welcome His Excellency Christoph to share the experience of the Polish experience in regenerating their cities. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for showing this short movie. Welcome back to Katowice. I'll come back to Katowice during the course of the presentation. First of all, it's my great pleasure to be speaking at the Malaysia Urban Forum 2020. I would like to extend my gratitude to Urbanize Malaysia, the organizers of the event, and to Minister Zuraida Kamarudin personally for the invitation. Let us all, for a start, use some imagination. Let us imagine that 84% of Kuala Lumpur, God forbid, including the Twin Towers, is in ruins, and it's all covered in rubble. Just a couple of buildings standing here and there. Now, this is precisely how Warsaw, the capital city of Poland, looked like in 1945. Equally, 60% of all the urban areas in Poland look precisely in this way. Everything was in ruins. Housing, hospitals, railway stations, schools, museums, libraries, private collections, it was all practically gone. That's why re-urbanizing the country became the primary concern, and generally speaking, it was successfully completed within the next 20 years. It was since then that the city planning, urbanization, became one of the key fields of study at the departments of architecture at Poland's universities. It remains so until now. This is why I'm particularly honored to inform the distinguished participants assembled here and watching online that Poland has been chosen by the UN as the host of the 11th session of the World Urban Forum in June 2022. What is more, I'm particularly happy that the WF11 will be held in the Polish city of Katowice, which you have just seen, which some of you may already know as it successfully hosted the UN COP24 in 2018. I see many similarities between Katowice and Kuala Lumpur. Both are new cities. Katowice became the city in 1865. KL was founded in 1857. Both cities were founded for mining purposes, tin in Ampang and coal in Katowice. If you look at the urban development, they both grew chiefly because of the construction of a railway used to ferry away the natural resources. I remember that when I first visited Kuala Lumpur back in 1986, and it seems today like ages, it immediately seemed to me as a place worthy of living here. I liked it, I truly liked it very, very much. I can assure you that it was not the case of Katowice at the same time. In fact, Katowice was deemed quite an unpleasant place due to mining, heavy industry, and equally heavy pollution. Nowadays, it's a vibrant city and an industrial, educational, and cultural center. In fact, Katowice is one of the greenest and environmentally most friendly cities in Poland. It is also a place of dynamic and sustainable economic development, thanks to technologically advanced industries and the Katowice Special Economic Zone. Finally, Katowice is the capital of the first metropolitan area in Poland, integrating 41 cities and municipalities as part of the Upper Silesian metropolitan area. In short, Katowice is an example of successful urban transformation. We in Poland believe that this is a story worth sharing. Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur in particular has a long tradition of contributing to the global debate about sustainable urban development, not least through the successful hosting of the Urban World Forum 9 in 2018. We are ready to share our experience in the field of urban planning and will be happy to learn from the experience of Malaysia. At this juncture, I would be remiss not to sincerely thank the Honorable Minister Zoraida Kamarudin for the information shared with us on Malaysia's lessons learned from organizing WF9. I hope that we will have the opportunity to further cooperate with the Malaysian Ministry of Housing and local government on this and many other matters. Zooming out, I see the story of the revitalization of Katowice as a symbol for the much-needed revitalization of the world after the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to achieve sustainable development, all of us are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals. It is my honor to inform you that Poland has been quite successful in her progress towards realizing these goals. With this in mind, let me point to a few areas that I believe more bilateral cooperation between Poland and Malaysia can contribute to our success in the further implementation of the SDGs. Both Malaysia and Poland have faced same issues linked to water management. I believe this is an area in which Poland can offer environmentally friendly solutions. Similarly, our country should cooperate on water management and air quality, as these are areas in which Poland has an increasing amount of innovative solutions. Poland also offers many valuable lessons when it comes to food production technology and increasing food security. Cooperation in this area can help address some of the problems Malaysia is facing. Finally, Katowice is not the only Polish example of sustainable urban development. I invite you all to visit and find out for yourselves. Next year seems a good time to do so, as in 2021 we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Poland and Malaysia. I hope that this joyous occasion will allow us to fully realize the potential of our bilateral cooperation to the benefit of our both nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your speech, Your Highness of Ambassador of Poland. Now we like to welcome our Secretary General, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Zainal Abidin Abu Hassan, and Executive Director UN Habitat, Datuk Sri Maimunah Sharif, to join this discussion, high-level dialogues, accelerated action towards implementing the SDG in Malaysia. Now I'd like to call upon Yang Berbahagia Datuk Zainal Abidin Abu Hassan to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning, Mr. Stephen Preissner, United Nations of Malaysia, Professor Mr. Gustav Debnicki, Ambassador Republic of Poland, Ibaga Datuk Dr. Mazlin Mokhtar, Solution Network Malaysia, Director of Institute Alam Sekitar dan Pembangunan Lestari. Ibaga Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dr. Zakri Abdul Hamid, Chairman of ATRI Advisory. Good to see you again, Chairman. Tan Sri. Mr. Hamdan Majid, Moderator. I'm standing here on behalf of my Honourable Minister because she wasn't feel well, so she decided to just skip to this forum to the benefit of everybody. In fact, she's well, but just a bit because of due to weather and her hectic work probably. But she's good to take a rest. Ladies and gentlemen, in September 2015, 170 world leaders gathered at the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit in New York to adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This new agenda, grounded in international human rights law,
You are now unmuted.
covers a broad set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, and it serves as the overall framework to guide global and national development action until 2030. These goals are elaborated in detail in the final outcome document, Transforming Our World, the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The preamble itself contains a statement about 5 interlinked and integrated areas of 4 action that are of critical importance to humanity and the planet. These areas are known as the 5 Ps. The first P refers to the people, where people are recognized as the heart of development. The second P refers to planet, on promoting sustainable use of Earth's resources. Third P is prosperity. It specifically focuses on inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And the fourth P refers to peace, and it highlights on access to justice and human rights for all. And the final P is recognized as the most crucial component, where it recognizes the importance of multi-stakeholder partnership that calls for global solidarity and people-centered approach to development. In December 2016, the Economic Planning Unit, Prime Minister Department, had set up a National SDG Steering Committee. It included the entire key government agencies, as well as representatives from the private sector, academia, and civil society organizations. Malaysia's Shared Prosperity Vision 2030 was formulated in line with Sustainable Development Spirit of the SDGs. The 12th Malaysia Plan is also expected to include a focus on sustainability. This initiative aims to highlight the partnerships with CSOs that will lead to clearer actions and recommendations on policies and laws. The establishment of the SDG is an indication on the first progressive step in bringing the discourse of SDGs not only at the national level that confines only with the policymakers, but also a reflection on the localization approach. The implementation of the SDGs at the local level, where the responsibilities are no longer country-centric, but each state must also find the most appropriate means consistent with their needs and resources. Such a step will hopefully contribute to living up the spirit of leave no one behind. In the human rights context, all clusters are relevant since human rights are cross-cutting issues. With its multitude of connections with various organizations and think tanks across the country, the Alliance has its advantages in engaging the grassroots for local development and empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable development has been at the heart of Malaysia's development approach since 1970s, with an emphasis on eradicating poverty, improving the well-being of the people, providing universal access to education, and caring for the environment. In 2009, we renewed our commitment to sustainable development when we launched the new economic model, which features 3 goals: achieving high income, inclusivity, and sustainability. These continue to resonate well with the 3 components of the SDGs, namely economy, social, and environment. Malaysia is making progress on many SDG targets. In line with the theme of eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world, this chapter places Malaysia's historical development in context and presents the current status on 8 selected SDGs in terms of achievements, the key strategies that have contributed to this outcome, and the remaining development agenda to be pursued. One of initiatives to implement SDGs at capital level, the National Community Policy initiated last year that related to SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities and Communities. This policy is aimed at building the spirit of competitiveness and unity to enable members of a community to live in a conducive environment and in harmony and prosperity. Through this policy, Ministry wish to see communities that would be active in keeping their surroundings clean and safe, that have high morals and civic consciousness, and that practice a culture of mutual advice for the benefit of everyone. The implementation of the National Community Policy is to ensure that objectives can be achieved. Ministry welcomes government departments and agencies, the corporate sector, educational institutions, registered associations, and professional bodies to be involved in corporate social responsibility programs to help improve the quality of life of the PPR communities. Other ministries' policies that related to SDGs are National Housing Policy 2.0, which is SDG 11, Affordable Housing Policy, also SDG 11, Malaysia Smart City Framework, SDG 9, and SDG 11 2, National Cleanliness Policy, SDG 11, National Waste Management Policy, SDG 12, National Physical Plan 2, SDG 8, and also SDG 13, and SDG 14, and SDG 17, and National Urbanization Policy is SDG 8, SDG 11, 13, 14, and 17. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, urbanization in Malaysia presents ample opportunities for academic prosperity and social advancements. Many of the fastest growing cities in Asia Pacific are expected to drive almost 80% of GDP growth through 2030. The implementation of SDGs is very much in line with Malaysia's own development plans and the vision of shared prosperity 2030. Now comes with the IR 4.0, where digital, physical, and biological spheres converge. The dynamism of this cycle is progressing at an unprecedented pace with a scope that is almost unimaginable. I would like to conclude my speech by thanking you for your serious and committed discussions during this journey, which has placed urbanization on the top of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. I hope participants and speakers alike will come up with a lot of new ideas and about proposals to help us drive the sustainable smart nation through transformational changes for collective benefits of all stakeholders and the nation. Let us build together a more sustainable community and a sustainable generation for the benefit of all Malaysians. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Terima kasih. Yang berbahagia Datuk Zainal Abidin Abu Hassan, Secretary General, Ministry of Housing and Local Government, for your very open eyes speech to us in the rooms and virtual, because now we are more than 200 people now online with us. Now I'd like to invite again Mr. Hamdan to continue to moderate the session. Please, Mr. Hamdan.
Thank you, Dr. Azmizam, and I'd like to thank our Secretary General for a very informative speech about Malaysia's plans that has been put in place towards achieving the 2030. Probably this is a good setting that opens up to our panel discussion. We have three fellow panelists here. Mr. Stephen Prisoner from the representative of the United Nations for Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and what do you call Singapore, Brunei, Darussalam. Professor Dr. Mazlin Mokhtar from UKM, and Tan Sri Zakri from Academy of Sciences. Now, the format would be that each of you all will speak for 5 to 10 minutes, and I hope you can keep to your time. And then we will open up a dialogue session between the panelists, and hopefully we can also take some questions from the floor. So with that, can I invite Mr. Stephen Prisoner for his opening remarks?
So good morning, everybody, in situ and online. Very impressive, the number of online participants. Dato Sri Maimuna Sharif, the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Dato Zainal Abidin, the Secretary General of the Ministry of Housing and Local Governance, distinguished panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by really congratulating the organizers for this hybrid forum. I think it's really extraordinary, and I thought that the introductory inaugural session was going very well. And one thing really impressed me especially. There were many, many messages, of course, passed, but I think that Maimouna, you said that before this forum, there was extensive participatory process and consultation process going on in cities to collect inputs from women, from grassroots and others. And I think this is really worth highlighting among all the other things, because I really think it's so important. I think this comes obviously at a fantastic time. We have just coincidingly the General Assembly session in New York. Last Friday, in fact, marked the 5-year anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals. As has been already mentioned, this was unanimously endorsed by 193 member states on the 25th of September 2015. But at the same time, I can already anticipate one of the comments I will make. The progress worldwide has been too slow. So therefore, at the beginning of the year, Secretary General of the United Nations called for a decade of action, only 10 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm so happy to be invited to this session, because obviously urban development will make or break the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that can be confidently stated, especially in a country like Malaysia, where 75% of the GDP, 76% of the people belong to cities. And the vast majority of emissions are also created by cities. Now, these SDGs have been very articulately, I think, presented by a previous speaker, Datu Zainul Abidin. Thank you so much for beautifully, I think, pointing out what the SDGs are about, especially the grounding in international treaties, international human rights law is important. But I would like to kind of refer to current messaging that goes around social media, and I think it's not fake news. It's a slide consisting of 3 waves: a small wave, a medium-sized wave, and a very large wave. The small wave is COVID-19. The medium-sized wave is climate change. And the large wave is biodiversity collapse. And this is very much, I think, the view of the United Nations. Will have in 2 days in New York a biodiversity summit, which will really discuss the dramatic stage of biodiversity degradation everywhere. And I mention this because Malaysia is one of the 10 hotspots of biodiversity that we still have on our planet. And I'm every weekend reminded when I venture into your beautiful rainforests. But as you have rightly pointed out, Secretary General, the SDGs cover 4 interrelated dimensions: the dimension of people or social inclusivity, the dimension of prosperity that has to drive the SDGs through inclusive economic development, the dimension of the planet and of the environmental impact, and the repair, the huge repair agenda of the environment. And finally, and last but not least, you said, I think if I understood correctly, even potentially the most important one is the agenda of peace, good governance, that carries all the other 3 policy objectives. So this means that for the world, this is a very, very ambitious agenda, but the only way to go to really kind of create a better world by 2030. We have before us an unfinished poverty reduction agenda, as I mentioned, a huge environmental repair agenda, a reorientation of the economic paradigm to include what so far has been referred to as environmental externalities or social externalities, and the good governance and human rights agenda. In the first 5 years, as I mentioned, countries have experienced numerous challenges to implement this, and therefore we are falling globally behind all the 17 targets. So the message from the Secretary General is acceleration, acceleration, more effort, and especially a move with all parts of society moving in tandem, not only government, but also the private sector, civil society, and the people themselves. We call it an all-of-nation approach that all have to work together to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I would like to acknowledge at this point in time Malaysia's strong commitment towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We have been having the honor from the United Nations side to work with the government on many of the issues, such as the mainstreaming of goals into planning, for example, into the revision of the 11th Malaysia Plan. As per the database of our regional UN organization, UNESCAP, we know that Malaysia is doing fairly well on some of the SDGs, notably especially the social SDGs, such as education and health, but also poverty reduction, but that we are, like the other parts of the world, quite dramatically off track in terms of environment. Climate change is actually moving backwards. Biodiversity is moving backwards. And for some of the goals, we simply don't have the data yet to measure the progress. And therefore, we also collaborate with the excellent colleagues from the Department of Statistics Malaysia that builds a comprehensive progress monitoring system based on the 232 indicators that the SDGs enshrine. Now, I will very quickly go over COVID. We all know that COVID presented a catastrophic dent into the SDG progress in the year 2020. Maybe with the temporary exception of climate change, we know that carbon emissions during the time of the global lockdown have reduced by about 17% globally. But in the meantime, we are quickly catching up, and therefore the message from headquarters is we need to fix those policies that so far haven't worked. And we believe that the crisis of COVID-19 is really the opportunity to build back better and to adjust those policies that so far haven't worked. Now, my next point is that the quality of urbanization, I gave the heading at the very start, will make or break the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's not only about SDG 11, as you have mentioned, Secretary General, but it's about so many other SDGs that will be driven by the urban target 11, but the urban goal. Malaysia is an urbanized country. I don't have to kind of give the figures here. And this will make urban areas primed for, on the one hand, higher inequalities. I have to admit, having now been in your beautiful country for the last 3.5 years, I was quite touched to see low-cost housing areas in Kuala Lumpur itself, or in Petaling Jaya, only a few hundred meters away from splendid high-risers, which were shockingly deprived in terms of services. Housing affordability has worsened. It is now 5 times the annual household income. And on the other hand, of course, the dimension of environmental sustainability is kind of impacted by increased carbon emissions. At the moment, I understand that Malaysia has the 3rd highest rate of car ownership in the world. So the midterm review of the 11th Malaysia Plan has recognized some of the challenges, many challenges of the urban agenda. The urban sprawl was mentioned, the lack of affordable and adequate housing, and the lack of green and open spaces, and much more, insufficient public transport, for example. And we hope that your ministry will have a very prominent place also in the 12th Malaysia Plan that is being drafted right now. Now, our moderator asked us to focus on the how, because we all know what the issues are. So I would just like to propose 3 or 4 points in terms of, I think, modalities more than kind of certain issues that we may need to look at to achieve a bigger dent by urban centers into the SDG agenda. The first one is we need to continue to align plans and budgets with the SDGs. And as I said, this has begun and good progress has been made, but it's a very complex agenda. And as new data comes available, I really think there needs to be a policy dialogue at all levels to really ensure that the main public budget is really aligned to those SDGs that fall behind, those issues that fall behind. Number two, in doing so, Malaysia obviously is a federal state, and one of the contradictions that we have seen is that policies are sometimes fantastic at federal level, but are contradicted by, for example, lack of resources at state level and at local level. So I think there needs to be really a thinking of what the best kind of level of decentralization is, the best level of fiscal decentralization is. Otherwise, we will experience more, for example, encroachment into rainforest because states need those resources. We have proposed to the government earlier a so-called ecological fiscal transfer, which would reward environmentally sound behavior by states and not only make dependent the allocations on the basis of, I think, what is now the case, population and number of and road network in any state. Thirdly, I think the quality of local diagnosis and action, SDG localization, needs to be strengthened. And I would like to give credit here to a very interesting project of the all-party parliamentary group, where in 10 constituencies this already has been done, but it was done at the area of parliamentary constituencies, and I think we need to do the same in urban, in urban municipalities. Happy to hear today that 5 cities and townships have already been awarded for their excellence in SDG, being SDG cities. And finally, also at local level, and we have promoted this very much at national level, we need to engender a whole-of-nation approach. And this whole-of-nation approach means that it's not only the task of the public sector to make the SDGs happen, but it's equally the task of the private sector. But the private sector is unlikely to move towards compliance with SDGs unless certain regulations change and unless certain incentives for the private sector change to build in environmental and social externalities. I close by mentioning a few words on the role of the United Nations in the country. We are 8 agencies in Malaysia and 11 additional ones, including Habitat, that work from the region and beyond. I think we have an excellent UN country team in place here in Malaysia, where we really try to provide one UN advice to the government on different matters. We have a 5-year framework coming up, which we hope will be signed by the end of October. It's called the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. And one of the outputs of that framework is called Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Development, recognizing the importance of sound urban development. And so both at strategic level as well as at project level, there is a vast number of activities going on in Malaysia. The purpose again is to look at the all-of-nation approach. So one strategic thrust is really to bring the private sector in, and you will hear more about this in the year 2021. So in conclusion, COVID-19 is not only a catastrophic year for mankind, but we believe it's also an opportunity, because changes of policies have always happened after crisis. Urban development is one of the very important thrusts, so hopefully a very prominent role in the 12th Malaysia Plan. and we from the United Nations stand ready for supporting the government and other actors to make this very ambitious agenda happen. But let's not forget, it is the only agenda, and we need to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I invite Professor Dr. Mazlin to... Yeah.
Terima kasih, Encik Hamdan. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamdan, our moderator. Distinguished panelists, Datuk Zainal Abidin, Sekjen, Datuk Sri Maimunah keluar sekejap, Ambassador Christoph, Puan Nurliza. Thank you to KPKT and Urbanis and organizing partners for inviting me and my institution to speak for a bit here. If I can request Akil to, can we show the other one first? Thank you so much to Stefan and Ambassador Christoph, and also Datuk Zainal for pointing out many good points about Malaysia. But today, whatever we do in terms of the 17 SDGs and 169 targets, 232 indicators, we are being monitored by SDSN, Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And in Malaysia, we have launched the SDSN Leadership Council way back in 2013, 10 of October. Our founding chairman leader is Tan Sri Zakri. 6 years he held that post, and he handed over that to Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia now, a corporate leader, to take up the SDSN Malaysia Leadership Council. But anyway, SDSN is an entity of which I'm one of the members of the Leadership Council Malaysia. They have a system to monitor the progress of SDG implementation of about 160 something countries throughout the world. They are based in Paris. Mr. Schmidt Guido is organizing that with his team. So every year, whether you like it or not, countries, you're going to get a report card. And this is the report card for Malaysia. As you can see, the green color, only 4 categories. And what is not so good about Malaysia is the pointing downwards. SDG number 17. We are decreasing. We are not performing very well, Datuk Zainal. So not blaming Datuk Zainal. All of us in Malaysia, we must back up. Somehow or rather, our partnership, we are not doing well, whether it's international partnership or is it among us. But I would like to interpret it from the speeches of Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister, our Yang Berhormat Zuraida Minister, CEO Urbanis, and also Datin Sri Maimunah. I would like to take this challenge that it means partnership within among ourselves. We must back up and do better. If you listen to Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister this morning, the challenge is how all the ministries must work together. And the other bit is how to make sure, like Stefan says, not only at the federal level we are good, we are very good in terms of policy. Malaysia is being saluted by the world with some beautiful policies, but implementing it is the challenge. So whether we like it or not, 4, we are performing very well. About 5, we are stagnating. And about 5, we are improving. And 1, we are failing. So we must improve. The next slide, please. Akil. Terima kasih. Kalau boleh besarkan sikit. So by wrapping up of all what Stefan had said, Ambassador Christoph had said, and also all the prominent VVIPs had mentioned this morning, we must try to do better, particularly at the local level. And I purposely, in this diagram, to share with you that we must do better, I simply pull out the local government especially. Not to say that all the government officers are performing well at federal and all that. We are performing well, but still not perfect. But I would like to throw a challenge to all of us from year 2020, 10 more years to 2030, local leadership, particularly from the local government side, you must take responsibility. And then I purposely also put the blue hand there, academia. I'm coming from academia, researcher. We must also help at the local level, particularly. You see, Malaysia is very good at the ministry level. Policies are beautiful. But now we must do better at the local level. And under KPKT, there you have this kerajaan tempatan, local government. I think our last count, it's 153 local, 154 local authorities. Thank you, Datuk Zainal. And in terms of district, because when Stefan says development must happen for social and economic, but environment you mustn't forget. So the incidents of Sungai Kim Kim, Kuala Koh, the water treatment shut down for 4 days. Hey, please, we don't want this to be repeated. We must back up. So environment must be attached together with economic development. And this is very heartening because under the Economic Planning Unit and Ministry of Economic Affairs prior to the current government, Perikatan, now they put back the Economic Affairs under Jabatan Perdana Menteri. Datuk Mustafa Muhammad is the minister. But SDG is high on the agenda. So this is good. Economic Planning Unit is taking charge of it, ensuring that all the 17 SDGs are aligned to the 11 Malaysia Plan, and we are waiting anxiously now to listen to the 12 Malaysia Plan. But Malaysians, congratulations. From the minister, senior secgens, downwards, okay, but we need to do better at the local level. So at the local level, somehow or other, if you look at this diagram, there is the keyword which we throw in, circular economy. We must think better. How to ensure economic development and prosperity will happen, but it will not jeopardize or destroy the environment. And our natural resource must be utilized wisely. Kena guna sumber-sumber asli dengan bijaksana. And then there's a word, leveraging green and cleaner technology. So, smart people in university, there are about 100,000 lecturers and researchers, nearly 1 million university students and university colleges students. We have the human resource, Datuk Zainal Abidin, Datuk Sri Maimunah, we have that human resource in Malaysia, but we must work better. But, don't get me wrong, we also have experts and brilliant people in the private sector and among NGOs and community. But we must work together. But who better to take leadership? It must be the local authority leaders and also district officer. Because in Malaysia, when it comes to matters managing the environment, land, water, natural resource, it's under the state. And it trickles down to district office. But in terms of managing day-to-day and the licensing and monitoring, it be fallen on the shoulders of the local authority leaders. So somehow or other, ministry like Ministry of Water and Environment, Ministry of Housing and Local Government, somehow or other we must work together. So in between, I really hope that you don't forget the academia, clever people. Please come on board and help. But I also encourage myself and my colleague academia, please, we also must take proactive action at the local level to approach local authorities and district office. So who to come up, stand up and offer services? No, we must do it among ourselves. Don't point finger. One finger you point, 3 pointing at you. So these are the kind of flipping the thinking and doing that I would like to encourage. Other matters which are also on this simple diagram is communication and advocacy. Yes, learning from COVID-19, which is actually a pandemic, a disaster, health disaster, what made Malaysia become top 5 or top 10 in the world in managing COVID-19? Communication. You look at Tan Sri Hisham, our DG, comes out on the television every day. And if doesn't count television, always give us the statistics. So you see, if we have a problem, communication is, hello, all of us have a problem. We must admit we have that problem, and we must find that solution together. So in a way, that is public health pandemic, which is public health disaster. I would like also to challenge ourselves. If there is environmental pollution problem, let's consider that a disaster as well. Several years back, we listened from a minister, hey, in Malaysia, there are about 21 or 23 dead rivers. And we have so many occurrences of water treatment shut down, particularly in the Klang Valley and the Kuala Lumpur area, so often now. Let's consider this as environmental disaster. Because Malaysians, somehow or other, Datuk Zainal, when there is a disaster, they get together. When peaceful time, no. You do your work, I do my work. Somehow sharing of data. When we say science must come in to help make decision making better, policy making better, that data must come from all of us. But we always say, oh yeah, we share data, big data. Your data, my data. My data, my data. They don't want to share. How? A good beginning is Department of Statistics Malaysia, as Stefan Prisner mentioned. Yes, they are already publishing reports on the 232 indicators. Some we are not performing well, but we can rise to that challenge. And of course, whatever we do, we must be supported by research and capacity building. This is where we have so many universities who are claiming we are top rank in the world, top 1% in the world. But of course, the community of Malaysia, including Datuk Zainal, will say, hey, where are you, universities? Where are your innovation and all that? So we at academia, we must accept this challenge. Yep, we need to work better together for the sustainability of one and all. And Stefan shared just now about APPGM, All Party Parliamentarian Group for SDG Malaysia. This is very good. Government representative parliamentarian and opposition, they get together, they form this. That means we have that political will, but we hope it will cut across all the 222 parliamentarian areas of Malaysia. And then we have SCRP, coming to business and industry. Society for Certified Risk Professional. You look at their website. They are into managing the risk. So in the diagram, I hope there is a word mentioning risk-based implementation. United Nations nowadays encourage us to look at DRR, disaster risk reduction. Everything is risky around us. So to make cities more livable, state more livable, and country, the whole nation livable, look at what are the risks around you, look at the hazards, the exposure, and find experts and non-experts, sit together, look out for solutions to prevent or zero-rise that risk. So Malaysia, we need to back up in terms of DRR, disaster risk reduction. I think that's enough for the time being, Datuk Zainal and Datuk Sri Maimunah. Hopefully we can interact a bit better later. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Prof, for your frank remarks. Maybe I'll get Tan Sri to have a short presentation before we have a dialogue.
Assalamualaikum. Very good afternoon to KSU, Datuk Zainal dan Abidin, and Datuk Sri Maimunah. While they are sorting out my slide, let me welcome home Datuk Sri Maimunah and congratulate you as a trailblazer for Malaysia, being the first Malaysian and woman to be the Executive Director of UN Habitat. Also, Datuk Sri, I think you would agree with me with the Malay saying, hujan emas di negeri orang, hujan batu di negeri sendiri, lebih baik negeri sendiri, with all our problems, right? And what I'd like to do very briefly, the chair gave me only 5 minutes, but I might sit to 7. Yeah? I'm just following the topic of this meeting. Next slide. I'm just going to focus on one of the 5 Ps that was mentioned earlier, and this would be on the planet. Next. And as had been mentioned before, COVID-19 we need to say it again and again. And as explained by one of my friends, COVID-19 is the greatest challenge facing the world today since the Second World War. Next slide. So nature is calling. How will we respond? This is very challenging indeed. Carry on, next slide. This slide here is also capturing what others have been saying. I just want to refer to Kuala Lumpur on the right, and the fact that you would notice at the height of the MCO in this city, even the river in town was cleaner, isn't it? And so is the rest of the world. There are even some fake news about Venice being clean, using pictures from someplace else. But it's true. It's true. The environment was cleaner because people pollute less. Next. SDG 11, of course, is on sustainable cities. That's what we are here for. Next. I would want to argue here the key to overcoming the challenges of sustainable development is science. Can I use closer so you see my slide? Science, technology, and innovation. So, as I said here, scientists could hold the key if city leaders would invite them as partners. There are many examples that are found which can be used to practice sustainable development. I cited one here, neuromorphic technology, software that can analyze images on each camera, could do that and submit the data to a central repository, and we could use that data to catch all these criminals, like those Paragot handbags, you know, and many other things, artificial intelligence, of course. Next. What I wanted to stress here, and I think colleagues like Dato' Mazlin also mentioned, is this very important science policy nexus. Just to share with you one anecdote from Gus Peth, who used to be the UNDP administrator. And Gus said, what do you see as the biggest environmental challenge facing us today? And he said, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. Gus admitted that he was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with this, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists do not know how to do it. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, scientists, even armed with an avalanche of data and scientific info, we can't do this because what we really need, next slide, we need a cultural and social transformation. And I want Dato' Sri Maimuna to agree with me as she moves around the world looking at the problems. You know, we have enough science, but what we don't have is the mentality, you know, the consciousness, the cultural and social transformation. Why some countries are more advanced than ours, including in particular countries like Japan. I used to be in a conversation with Ton M several years ago with a group of academics from Harvard. So we were talking about Islamization. I lived in Japan for 8 years at the UN University, and I told the group, the Japanese practice Islamic ways. And Tony M said, in Japan, there's no Muslim, but there's a lot of Islam there. And he said, in Saudi Arabia, they are all Muslim. Well, I wonder about Islam, you see. So one professor from Harvard asked him, Mr. Mahathir, how do you rate Malaysia on a scale of 1 to 10? And he smiled, his sarcastic smile, he said, I think Malaysia is more like Saudi Arabia. Many Muslim, but not sure how Islamic. Because Islamic practice environmental sustainability. Next. So that's one aspect. The other one I want to leave the meeting today is scientists need to engage the politician. A classic case is the IPCC. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was unknown until Al Gore came into the picture. And as Mazin was saying about communication, the great communicator is there. And the guy and IPCC won the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, in 2007. Now, IPBES, this is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, of which I'm the founding chair. We also followed the IPCC. When we released our global assessment report in Paris last year, we went to President Macron's office and convinced him. I think it was you, Stefan, who was saying about biodiversity as a calamity. The president said, this is the fight of the century to combat biodiversity loss. So we got traction. Next. So it's so important that scientists must link up with political leaders. Scientific knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, is not enough. It's how you package the message. The messenger is important. So guys like him is important. Next. And like him too, you know. And another one, next slide, and him. Yeah, and working, and also people like Ban Ki-moon working right to the UN level. Just to leave you with this, the politicians, as you know very well, they are very nice people, you know, very good listeners. They, from my assessment, don't really care the scientific details. They said all you need to convince me where the science can provide jobs, and also provide prosperity for the people, the riot. These guys want to get elected, you know. So it's incumbent upon our group to interact with them. Finally, next one, next slide. Yes, Mazlin also mentioned about this, and also Stefan, international collaboration. This is a quote from Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of the UK many years ago. Many of the challenges we face today are international, whether it's tackling climate change or biodiversity loss. So we need this international movement, or what is called also as the science diplomacy. Next one. But I would leave this talk by this point. We can develop very good stimulus package as we navigate this pandemic. Political agenda and socio-economic development are very key, but we need to balance and reorient them with environmental concerns and quality of life. Because after all, like COVID-19, the source of the problem is the destruction of habitat in Wuhan. We must not let the politician or policymakers like Dato' Zainal Abidin here not to forget that. Yeah, we can have all those economic things, but environment is also important. Thank you very much.
I think we have had a series of excellent remarks regards to accelerating the implementation of SDGs. Our KSU has clearly outlined that the country has a plan and a strategy, and there is a set of measures is being measured in terms of performance. While we also heard from Prof. Mazlin that things are not necessarily looking good by virtue of what is being measured, and there are some red lights that's already being flashing, and if we do not deal with it, we are unlikely to reach those targets and so on. While Malaysia as a country definitely has made progress, because obviously the challenge is that, coming back to Stefan, is that while Malaysia has made significant progress over the last 5 decades or more in terms of achieving its development goals, however, we are slipping. The development gains that the country has achieved over the last 5 decades is something that we are now putting at risk. We are seeing our poverty numbers have increased. Issues of inequality has definitely become a major concern. Our development pattern, in fact, our even economic model there's a need to rethink. There's a lot of good things that's been articulated in the new economic model, however, very little has translated to action. While we have great policies, there's very little that happens at the local level. I think these were some of the remarks that has been made. And we are at the same time facing challenges that are beyond individual group of actors, by virtue that a lot of these things are coming at the environmental level. Southeast Asia is seen as one of those hot spots of climate change. We will definitely see sea level rise, and temperatures are definitely going to increase. It will become much hotter to be operating in this part of the world. We will have higher incidence of rain. We saw about 3 weeks ago how Kuala Lumpur was flooded, and those events will become a recurring issue. So while we have a lot of rain, we're also going to have a series of problems of what you call no water available, either due to polluting factors or water that we are not storing to use. So there are various environmental challenges that is emerging. While Prof. Zakri, I think you definitely hit the nail to say that there's a lot that needs to come from looking at science, the nexus between science and policy, and the role how science can play through innovation to help in terms of understanding the kind of interventions. The example that you highlighted earlier with regards to using, to detect who are the, people who are defaulting in terms of contributing to the SDGs. Now, those were the remarks I think I heard. Now, but probably this is the key question maybe I would like to open to the panelists is that Malaysia definitely, as I said in my opening remarks, is that it's a case study of how a poor nation at the point of independence has achieved much. And the journey is a glass half full. While we are at risk to see the development gains being lost. So when comparatively Malaysia does well, and I think maybe that's the reason why sometimes when we look policy comparison with other countries, that we lose sight of the fact that when you look at granular level details, Malaysia faces a lot of issues with regards to decentralization. I think there's a conversation earlier that brought about saying that there needs to be a higher level of local level accountability, and you need to empower at the local level so that you can see local level outcomes. How common is this being happening in other parts of the world? Is this something that is novel that Malaysia is spearheading, or is this something that is fundamental to achieving the SDGs? So maybe I'll open this to Stefan, and if the other panelists could also remark.
If I understood you correctly, you were talking about the gap between policy and implementation, no? I think this is it depends on a variety of factors, but I think it primarily depends on the quality of institutions. And there is where the SDG 16 on good governance comes in. Definitely you cannot kind of give a linear relationship between the stage of development and the quality of institutions. I think there are some countries that have excellent institutions but have fallen nevertheless behind with certain targets, and on the other hand there is quite countries with great achievements but perhaps not really across the SDGs. Good example would be the example of the tiger states in Asia that have traditionally had much higher economic growth than let's say some of the more developed countries, but perhaps sometimes at the expense of the other two elements, the social kind of aspect and the environmental aspect. What is always quoted is the Scandinavian model, where you have, I think, really countries in place that have extremely strong local institutions that you know, are guided by policies at central level. You have a relatively small central government and a lot of human resources and a lot of financial resources to implement in a tailored manner at you know, local level. In terms of SDG achievements, those are the countries that are at the moment ahead. I mean, I know the network kind of monitors all of this, but the last time I checked, I think Sweden at this point in time is ahead in terms of the overall achievement in terms of SDGs.
Prof. Mazlin, I think one of the things I think you touched on was about the role of the private sector.
So if you look at
how do you see, how do you actually shift? Because fundamentally some of the problems that we are seeing on the government level, there's a lot of policies and guidelines and so on that's been put in place. Maybe there's not much incentive frameworks. But how do you shift? I think as Prof. Zakri highlighted earlier also, how do you shift to have a new behavioral norm? Because there's so much of greed and selfishness and so on. And Prof. Zakri, maybe you could also add in. Yeah. Because this is going to be the kind of obstacle that we're going to deal with. You know, you can have all the great policies, but you fail to implement because we are not able to deal with the fundamental issues of greed, selfishness, and apathy.
So in Malaysia, as Prof. Tan Sri Zakri had mentioned, economic development has always been high on the agenda. But over the 50 or 60 years of development, of course, Malaysia, we developed quite fastly. But at that time, we are lucky because environment is still okay. With matters pertaining to environment, one thing you must remember is the carrying capacity. So even if you are discharging from your factory and all that, the rivers are able to absorb because you have not exceeded the maximum carrying capacity. But in the case of Sungai Kim Kim and all that, you pass the threshold already. So what we need to do now, we have clever people, including we have very good business and industry associations in Malaysia. Do you have a Business Council for Sustainable Development? The answer is yes. The ambassador is here. Do we have FMM, Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers? Are they aware of SDGs and sustainable development? The answer is yes. How many SMEs do we have? Nearly 1 million. Okay, everybody is aware of this. Education system in Malaysia is also good. But how to flip
why
and
are
do
we
better?
failing?
So why are we failing? Maybe we are not working well together, and very sorry, enforcement must also come in to be a bit better.
But is it purely the role of government that is failing, or do you think that what do you call, the private sector is not prepared to accept the fact that you may need to what do you call operate at a much lower,
that's why we
accept
are
much lower profits and less greed?
In fact, if you think about it, when incidences of water treatment plants being shut down, partly because our businesses are discharging into the river, the cost of that 4 days shutdown runs into the billions of ringgit. So how to show to the Malaysian population, including business and industry population, hey, if you prevent pollution, is so much cheaper and better for you, in fact, and for the longer term. This kind of how to flip. So that's why in Malaysia, we all are being taught about this. Don't dirty your environment and all that. But it doesn't get into us. It is not part of our culture. That's why Tan Sri Zakri proposed the culture transformation. How to do this. That means how to flip. That means we need good psychologists to come and help us. How to inculcate, for example, businesses and industry in Korea and Japan, when they do know that their small little factory discharges something which is actually allowable, they don't discharge. They keep it and they treat it. So our industrial systems must be taken a relook. We must take a relook. Industrial parks in states and districts, we must sit down with them, saying that, hey, if your industrial park comprising about so many thousand factories here are discharging into this river, please don't operate just yet, because it's too expensive.
So I take note that what do you call, Prof. Zakri, I think you mentioned the need to, policymakers are prepared to listen and so on. Now, you are in a situation where you have worked with the various prime ministers over the last,
10 years.
10 years after you came back from the United Nations.
Yeah.
Now, what do you see that the failing that we're dealing with? Because fundamentally at the highest level, they are very conscious and willing. And I'm sure that this issue of externalizing the, externalities is very visible all around, because we hear this issue about pollution and environmental degradation and various issues of biodiversity loss through urban growth and so on, is all around us. Do people have different conversations in different rooms? That means that they're okay to listen to you, but when they go to a different room, they still go ahead and do things that are not right.
Thank you. First, let me respond. Don't blame the politician. It's very dangerous. Yeah, if you have compliments to them, you'll be all right. No, I'm joking. Politicians are very sporting, Datuk Sri. But let me relate some anecdotes. Last week, I had the honor of chatting with the Swedish ambassador in Malaysia. And we were talking about Sweden. For your information, Sweden is the #1 country practicing sustainable development for many years. And according to the ambassador, the key to that is not the politician, but education. Sweden used to be very poor at one time. Not sure, Stefan would know. Poorer than Malaysia at that time, many years ago. But education, changed all that. In particular, the element of sustainability was already imbued in the young children from a long time. So it became part of the Swedish DNA. Fast track. Is Datuk Kamil still in the room? Datuk Kamil from the Ministry of Education. During the break, I was chatting with Datuk Kamil, and he was telling me this story. A mother and a young child were walking in the park. Then suddenly there was one adult who was throwing rubbish, maybe a big wrapper of whatever, on the grass. And this child, I think, must have been trained in school to be sustainably conscious, was chasing after that rubbish. And the mother stopped him. And the mother stopped him. And he said, don't do that. So you can see the difference education makes. So if you ask me, Malaysia is not there yet. But all the same, I think the power of the masses need to be mobilized. We need to convince our political masters and policymakers that the only way forward is sustainability, and that includes the private sector. If your product is not sustainable, you would lose business. And again, finally, the Swedish ambassador was relating to me how the Volvo automotive company is already looking 50 years down the road how to make their company sustainable, and they are #1. Thank you.
I think on that note, maybe I will try to conclude the session, because I take note that we are just 1 minute past the allocated time. In conclusion, I think we heard Stephen Prisoner highlight that the Secretary General of United Nations had said that this is the decade of action. And based on what has been presented for Malaysia, given that session is focused about Malaysia, there's much to be done. And there's an urgency for the action. While we will need to educate and reform and bring a cultural transformation, but that needs to be complemented with very hard, strict enforcement, and also maybe improving both our regulation and regulatory environment to push for higher level of compliance. SDG is not just an agenda about sustainability. SDG is about the 5 Ps, and I think the key lies in the sense that, let's not look this from purely just an SDGs being seen as both either a social development tool or an environmental agenda, but rather it's about growth and prosperity, but growth and prosperity on the basis of being accountable for future generations. With that, I thank my fellow panelists and also thank the audience for joining us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hamdan. Thank you for moderate this session. To all the panelists and to Yang Berbahagia, Dato' Zainal Abidin Abu Hassan and ED, Dato' Sri Maimunah, for still with us today. And before we end of this session, we like to make us photo sessions with the panelists and Dato' Sri KSU, Dato' KSU and Dato' Sri Maimunah, and also the Ambassador of Poland. Please come to the stage. Thank you, Dato' Zainal. Thank you, Dato' Maimunah, Mr. Hamdan, and the panelists. We're going to have a very short break because we're going to continue 1:30 for the next session. We have a special permanent speakers from Professor Emeritus Dr. Mazlan Osman, Director of the International Science Council. She will talk about urban sustainability, science of city. We take short breaks and we continue by 1:30. Thank you. Yes.